My name is Ariadna, and the day I discovered my home was no longer mine, it all began with the sound of my father-in-law laughing. It wasn't a joyful laugh, the kind that fills a house on a Sunday afternoon. It was a short, dry, smug laugh. The sound of a man who believes he's just won a chess match I didn't even know I was playing. I was holding a certified mail envelope, the kind with thick paper and plastic windows that never brings good news. Inside, cold, brutal legal language spoke of a new lien, of a second mortgage on the property in my name and that of my husband, Leo. A massive debt, with figures that danced before my eyes, linked to a shell company I had never heard of. My father-in-law, Ricardo, snatched the paper from my uncontrollably shaking hands. "Ah, that," he said, with that false levity he always used when he wanted to downplay a catastrophe he himself had caused. "Just a little business maneuver, Ariadna. Don't you worry your little head about men's business." Beside him, my mother-in-law, Marta, nodded with a smile that was meant to be reassuring, but to me it only looked like a predator admiring its trapped prey. "It's for the good of the family, dear," she whispered. "Ricardo needs liquidity for an investment, a golden opportunity, and this house is an asset. We have to make it work." My gaze desperately searched for Leo, my husband, the man with whom I had chosen every tile in the kitchen and painted the walls of what was supposed to be our future child's room. He was standing by the fireplace, pale, unable to meet my eyes. His silence was the most painful confirmation. He knew. He had allowed his parents to use our nest, the sanctuary we built together with our savings and our dreams, as a casino chip. I vaguely remembered the day we signed the first mortgage, the panic and the excitement. I remembered my own father, a man of calloused hands and simple words, telling me, "Daughter, a debt is a sacred promise. Your house is your castle and your refuge. Never let anyone desecrate it." And now, the castle was being plundered from within. "I don't understand," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "How is this possible? My signature is required for something like this." Ricardo let out another one of those irritating little laughs. "Leo is a co-owner, and he gave us power of attorney. It's all perfectly legal, believe me. It's just paperwork. In 6 months, with the profits from the investment, we'll pay this off, and it'll be like nothing ever happened. You won't even know a thing." He treated me like a child, like another piece of furniture in the house they could make decisions about. My opinion, my security, my future. They were completely irrelevant. I saw in his eyes the same look they'd always given me since Leo introduced us. A simple girl, a mid-level administrator with a modest job, good for keeping the house clean and their son happy, but without a single brain cell for important matters. "What would you know about finance and assets, Ariadna?" Ricardo continued, patting my shoulder in a way that felt like a blow. "You just stick to organizing your invoices in that little office of yours. We'll handle the real business." That was the line. The spark that lit the fuse, that little office of yours. They believed I worked as an assistant at a small administrative firm downtown. Leo had told them that years ago, perhaps out of embarrassment or sheer laziness to explain the truth, and I never corrected him. I liked the anonymity. I liked being underestimated. The little office was in fact my own consulting firm, a very discreet boutique firm specializing in one of the most complex and ruthless niches in the financial world, forensic auditing and distressed asset acquisition. The papers I organized weren't utility bills. They were the financial skeletons of corporations on the verge of collapse. My job was to find the structural weaknesses in their debts, to analyze toxic credit portfolios so that my clients, large investment funds, could buy them for pennies on the dollar and then restructure them for massive profits. I wasn't afraid of debt. Debt was my native language. As my father-in-law explained his brilliant scam to me as if I was 5 years old, there were no tears in my mind. There was an org chart. a flow of assets and liabilities. The name of the shell company on that document wasn't a mystery, it was a starting point. I saw the debt they had just taken on not as a noose around my neck, but as a chain they had put on themselves, and they had just handed me its weakest link on a silver platter. They thought they had mortgaged my house behind my back, but what they had really done was unknowingly hire the architect of their own ruin. I nodded slowly, lowering my gaze so they wouldn't see the cold calculation that replaced the panic in my eyes. "It's okay," I whispered, letting them hear the defeat in my voice. "If it's for the family, I trust you." Ricardo smiled, victorious. Marta hugged me, whispering that I was a good girl. Leo finally looked at me, a mix of guilt and relief on his face. None of them saw the storm that was brewing behind my apparent submission. And it was in that instant, amidst the wreckage of my marriage and the loss of my home, that an icy calm washed over me. They thought they had sunk me, but they had only shown me where their treasure was buried, and they had given me the map. I wonder, have you ever felt like the people around you see you as a small, harmless version of yourself, with no idea of the power you truly hold? Tell me in the comments, and if you want to know how a map of debts becomes the key to a new door, subscribe. The days following my feigned surrender became a theater of the absurd. I adopted the role they had assigned me, the docile, slightly dim-witted wife concerned with trivial matters while the men handled the family's financial destiny. I started talking about the garden, about new recipes, about any trifle that would reinforce their perception of me. Inside, my mind was a war room. My consulting firm, my little office, became the command center for the most personal operation of my career. My first step was discreet. I used my resources to conduct a full audit of the shell company Ricardo had funneled the mortgage money into. The name, Phoenix Investments of the South, sounded grandiose and stupid. Exactly his style. I discovered what I already suspected. It was a newly created shell company with Ricardo as the sole administrator. There was no business plan, no golden investment in an emerging market. The money, the $200,000 that represented my home security, had been transferred almost entirely to a high-risk real estate developer trying to build a luxury apartment complex in an already saturated area. It was a desperate, all-or-nothing bet based on pure speculation. The pattern of belittlement intensified. Every Sunday, the family meal became a progress report for an audience of one they believed to be naive. "We're leveraging the capital, Ariadne," Ricardo would tell me, puffing out his chest and using a word he had clearly learned the week before. "It's an aggressive growth strategy. You have to spend money to make money." I would nod with an empty little smile, while in my head I was correcting his terminology. He wasn't leveraging capital. He was overexposing a single, non-liquid asset in a poorly rated investment vehicle. While he spoke of market synergies, I could see in my analysis that the developer already had 2 legal claims against them for non-payment to suppliers. He saw a glass skyscraper, I saw a house of cards in a hurricane. His arrogance was directly proportional to his ignorance of who I was. One afternoon, he brought me a stack of papers printed from the internet. "Look, Ariadne, something to keep you busy. It's a summary of the operation. Why don't you clean it up for me and make a little report with charts and colors? You're so good at those little things." It was the developer's business plan, a document full of optimistic projections and inflated data. I thanked him with the greatest humility I could feign. That night in my office, I didn't use colors. I used my predictive analysis software. I cross-referenced the brochure's data with real market data, the construction company's credit reports, and their account movements, which I accessed through one of my professional databases. The result was unequivocal. The probability of the project being completed and yielding the profits Ricardo expected was less than 7%. The probability of a total collapse and the loss of the entire investment was over 80%. He had handed me the expert evidence of his own incompetence. The greed soon manifested in more tangible ways. On the promise of money that didn't exist, they started spending. Marta showed up one day with a designer handbag whose price was equivalent to 3 months of my old salary, the one they thought I earned. "A little treat," she said, winking at me. "You have to get used to the good life, dear. Maybe some of it will rub off on you." Ricardo traded his modest sedan for a second-hand, yet equally ostentatious German sports car. He would deliberately park it, taking up almost 2 spots in front of my house, like a dog marking its territory. On credit, of course, he explained to an increasingly mesmerized Leo. But as soon as we close the deal, I'll pay it off in one go. It's important to project an image of success. I saw their new acquisitions not as luxuries, but as what they were: new debts. Each purchase was a new liability on their personal balance sheet, another nail in their financial coffin, which I meticulously documented in my file. The most painful escalation was watching them consume my husband. Leo, caught between loyalty to his parents and betrayal of his wife, chose the easy path. He adopted their rhetoric. He started telling me I was a pessimist, that I had no vision. One night I tried to talk to him. Without revealing my sources, I showed him some articles about the instability of the real estate market in that area. His reaction was cold. "My father knows what he's doing, Ariadna. He's been in business his whole life. You don't understand this stuff. Why can't you just support us and be done with it?" It was then that my already fractured heart finally broke. I realized I wasn't fighting for our house. I was fighting for mine. Leo wasn't a hostage. He was a convert. The noose his parents had thrown around my neck, he was helping to tighten. And then, 4 months after the initial scam, the centerpiece of my plan arrived. They found it themselves. It was a house. The house. A modern-style villa on the outskirts in a private gated community. It had everything they had always dreamed out loud: an infinity pool, a minimalist garden, and a chef's kitchen with a Carrara marble island. They became obsessed. The Sunday dinners stopped being business reports and turned into monologues about the house of our dreams. They would bring the real estate brochure and shove it under my nose. "Look, Ariadna, now this is a real kitchen, not like this little hovel. And the walk-in closet, it's bigger than your entire bedroom. When we get the money from the investment, we'll make an offer. The agent says there are other people interested, but with our money, we'll beat them," Ricardo fantasized. They described every corner, every material, every window. They didn't know that with every word, they were giving me the exact coordinates of their most vulnerable point. While they dreamed, I acted. I investigated the property. I found out the owners were getting a divorce and needed to sell fast. I discovered the house had a couple of outstanding debts with the city that scared off conventional buyers. And, most importantly, I continued my investigation into my in-laws' personal finances. I dove into their credit histories. I discovered that the flashy Phoenix Investments wasn't their only venture. Ricardo had a history of small, unpaid debts, personal loans with sky-high interest rates, and maxed-out credit cards. He was a chronic debtor, a man who lived by robbing Peter to pay Paul, always one step away from collapse. My plan took its final form. It wasn't enough to wait for their investment to crash and the second mortgage on my house to be executed. That was too passive, too slow. Karmic justice required a more elegant, more direct blow. Using a consortium I regularly worked with, I began to quietly buy up my father-in-law's debts. The loan for the sports car, the credit card debts, the small personal loans. The banks were delighted to sell off that junk debt for a fraction of its value to an entity that specialized in collecting it. In less than a month, without his knowledge, I became Ricardo's main creditor. His financial destiny was no longer in the hands of a bankrupt real estate developer. It was in mine. On the 5th month, the developer officially announced they were suspending payments. The investment had vanished. The money from my home's mortgage was gone forever. The news hit them like a ton of bricks. But Ricardo, in his infinite arrogance, remained in denial. "It's a temporary bump in the road," he assured us at a dinner thick with almost unbearable tension. "We'll get through this. We just need to refinance a few things." It was then that he said the words I had been waiting for. "We've made an offer on our dream house. A low one, of course. Contingent on us getting approved for a new loan. Now's the time to take a risk." They had taken the bait with a desperation that I almost pitied. Almost. I knew no bank in its right mind would give them a new loan in their situation. But I wasn't a bank. I was something much worse for them. Their hidden creditor, holding all the chains they themselves had forged, about to pull on all of them at once. The stage for the final act was set. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. The day of the climax arrived disguised as a business meeting. Ricardo, in an act of supreme desperation and arrogance, had secured an appointment at the law firm representing the sellers of his coveted house. His plan, as he explained it to a completely subdued Leo the night before, was to present themselves as a solvent and united family, implying that although their big investment had suffered a technical delay, they had the backing of the family's assets. He was referring, of course, to my house, to my future. They demanded that I accompany them. "It's crucial that we present a united front, Ariadna," Marta told me, her tone of false sweetness now tinged with an almost hysterical urgency. "Wear something discreet but elegant. Don't say anything, just nod and smile. You are part of this family and your presence gives us credibility." I agreed without hesitation. My presence was indeed crucial, but not for the reasons they imagined. The law firm occupied the top floor of a glass and steel building in the financial district. Everything screamed money and power. The polished marble floors, the Scandinavian designer furniture, the solemn silence broken only by the murmur of distant telephones. We were shown into a boardroom with a panoramic view of the city. Through the large window, I could see the modest building of my little office, and a smile almost escaped me. Mr. Ferrer, the seller's lawyer, a tired-looking older man, was there, along with my in-laws, sitting bolt upright, projecting a confidence as fragile as the glass table that separated us. Leo was next to me, shifting in his chair, his tie seeming to suffocate him. I remained silent, observing. The meeting began as I expected. Ricardo launched into a grandiloquent speech about his vision, his track record of successes, and the temporary nature of his liquidity problems. Mr. Ferrer listened with a professional patience that failed to hide his skepticism. Finally, the lawyer got to the point. "Mr. Fuentes, your offer is significantly below market price, and it's contingent on financing that, according to my research, has not been approved by any institution. My clients cannot accept it under these conditions." That's when Ricardo made his last and most serious mistake. Desperate, he turned to me. He pointed at me with a grand gesture, like a magician presenting his assistant. "Mr. Ferrer, don't worry about the guarantees," he said in a booming voice. "My son Leo and his wife Ariadna have our backs. They are co-owners of an excellent property, free of lions. Well, almost. A property with considerable equity that can be used to secure the deal. Right, Ariadna?" He stared at me, an implicit command in his eyes. He wanted me, the victim of his scam, to become his public accomplice, to offer the remains of my security on the altar of his greed. The entire room was looking at me. I felt Leo's pleading gaze, Marta's imperious one, and Ferrer's curious one. It was the final humiliation, the last attempt to nullify me as a person and turn me into a simple line item on their balance sheet. I didn't have to answer. At that exact moment, the boardroom door opened smoothly. The lawyer's assistant peeked in. "Mr. Ferrer, please excuse the interruption. A Miss Serrano from ACF Capital is here. She says she has an appointment concerning this very matter." Ferrer seemed confused, but he nodded. A second later, the architect of my vindication walked in. Miss Serrano was a woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed in a dark-tailored suit. She projected a calm, lethal authority. She held a tablet in one hand, and her analytical gaze swept the room before landing on my in-laws. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and emotionless. "I am Jimena Serrano, Legal Director of Asset Acquisition and Consolidation for ACF Capital. I understand we are here to discuss the purchase offer from Mr. and Mrs. Fuentes for this property." Ricardo looked at her in complete bewilderment. "Excuse me? ACF Capital? I don't believe we have any business with you." Miss Serrano offered the slightest of smiles. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it. It was the smile of a shark that smells blood in the water. "Oh, I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mr. Fuentes," she replied, sliding a finger across her tablet screen. "In fact, for several weeks now, you have been one of our most significant clients. ACF Capital recently acquired your entire personal debt portfolio. Let's see." She tilted her head, as if reading a grocery list. "We have the loan for a BMW 420D, license plate. Yes, this one. We have the consolidated debt of 3 premium credit cards for a total value of $72,000 and 2 smaller personal loans with consumer finance companies. In total, you and your wife owe us directly the sum of $143,000, not including the late fees that have already begun to accrue." The color drained from Ricardo's face. Marta choked back a scream, clapping a hand to her mouth where she wore expensive lipstick that I knew she had bought with one of those very cards. Leo stared at me, his eyes wide, a horrible understanding beginning to dawn in his mind. "But that's not all," Miss Serrano continued, relentless. Her tone remained perfectly professional, which made it all the more devastating. "The trigger for our action was the total loss of your investment in the luxury son developer. The second mortgage you took out on your son and daughter-in-law's property acted as cross-lateral for your other financial products. When that investment went into suspension of payments, the default clauses in your entire portfolio were activated. Therefore, I must inform you that your entire debt to us has been accelerated. The full payment is due immediately. In other words, Mr. Fuentes, you are not in a position to buy this house. You are legally insolvent." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. It was an absolute void, filled with the implosion of my in-laws' dreams and lies. Mr. Ferrer, the seller's lawyer, looked from Miss Serrano to Ricardo as if he were watching a fascinating play. Ricardo, stammering, finally found a shred of his old arrogance. "This is an attack. A conspiracy. How did you know? Someone set us up." And then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived, the validation. Miss Serrano didn't look at me directly. She looked at her tablet, as if consulting a footnote. "ACF Capital has a very proactive risk analysis department. The head of strategy for our distressed assets division is exceptionally meticulous. She flagged your portfolio, Mr. Fuentes, as a high-potential target for hostile acquisition nearly 6 months ago. Your profile fit our cascading collapse predictive model perfectly. It was her personal recommendation that initiated the entire process." Mr. Ferrer, intrigued, asked, "And who is the strategist, if I may ask? It seems she's made you a lot of money." Miss Serrano looked up from her tablet for the first time, and her eyes met mine. There was no complicity in her gaze, only a professional, cool, and distant respect that was more gratifying to me than any hug. Then she looked at the rest of the table and said with a clarity that cut through the air, "Our head of strategy and lead analyst on this file is Mrs. Ariadna Castillo." My name. My full name, spoken in that room like a sentence. The world of Ricardo and Marta fell apart. The expressions on their faces went from shock to disbelief and finally to a pure, naked horror as they connected the dots. The silent daughter-in-law, the girl from the little office, the fool who organized papers. It was me. It had always been me. I saw Leo look at me as if I were a stranger, as if he were seeing me for the first time. And in a way he was. He saw the woman he had underestimated and betrayed, who had nonetheless turned out to be infinitely more powerful than he or his family could ever have imagined. I said nothing. My silence was my victory speech. My calm was my celebration. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply presents a report, cold, detailed, and irrefutable. And in that room, my in-laws' report had reached its final conclusion: bankruptcy. The elevator ride down to the lobby was a descent into an inferno of silence. The air, which moments before had been charged with the electricity of the revelation, was now dense, heavy, almost solid. Ricardo, who had entered that office like a peacock, now looked like a deflated doll, his gaze lost on an invisible point on the marble floor. Marta was crying silently, without her usual theatrics. These were the dry, bitter tears of absolute defeat. Leo stood between them and me, in a physical and emotional limbo. When the doors opened, he was the first to exit, as if escaping a gas chamber. Outside, on the sidewalk, under the indifferent afternoon sun, the spell broke. Ricardo turned to me, his face a wrinkled mask of hatred. "Viper," he hissed, the word loaded with all the venom he had left. "You've destroyed us. You've destroyed your own family." I didn't answer. What could I say? He would never understand that they had burned the concept of family to the ground long before I decided to pick through the ashes. Marta tried one last tactic, that of the victim. "After everything we did for you, Ariadna, this is how you repay us?" It was then that Leo spoke. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Ariadna, why?" He looked at me, and for the first time in months, I saw a genuine plea in his eyes. He wanted an explanation, a justification, perhaps, an absolution that could ease the weight of his own weakness. I held his gaze, and in mine there was no anger, only a final clarity, as hard and clean as a diamond. "Because you left me alone, Leo. Because when your parents set our house on fire, you handed them the gasoline. This isn't what I did to you. This is what you did to yourselves." I turned, ready to walk away, to put a final end to that chapter of my life. He took a step toward me. "We can fix this." His parents looked at him expectant. It was his final choice, his last chance. The sight of his mother's look, a tremble of her lower lip, was enough for his resolution to vanish. He stopped. And in that hesitation, in that step he didn't take toward me, I lost him forever. Or perhaps I realized I had never had him at all. He stayed with them on the sidewalk, a trio of castaways on an island of their own making. I kept walking without looking back. Many people hearing this story might use the word revenge. But in my mind, it was never about that. Revenge is a hot, impulsive, messy emotion. My actions were cold, methodical, surgical. It wasn't an act of retaliation. It was an act of restoration. Imagine a perfectly balanced scale. On their side, they placed the weight of betrayal, deceit, and the theft of my security. I didn't add a new weight out of spite. I simply calculated the exact weight of their actions and placed it on my side of the scale. The result wasn't revenge. It was equilibrium. It was justice. They weren't punished by my hand. They were confronted with the inevitable consequences of their own decisions. Consequences that I, thanks to the very skill they despised, simply accelerated and brought to light. In the following weeks, I executed the final steps of my plan. The second mortgage on my house, which now belonged to my consortium, was canceled. The debt they created to destroy me became the instrument of my liberation. I walked into my home that evening, and for the first time I felt the air was clean, that the walls belonged completely to me. The ghost of their influence had been exorcised for good. And their dream house, the villa with the infinity pool and the marble island, met its own fate. My in-laws, of course, lost any option on it. Their offer was discarded, and their finances were seized. Through one of my investment companies, I submitted a cash offer to the sellers. A fair offer, one that covered their municipal debts and allowed them to move on. They accepted immediately. So yes, I bought their dream house. Not to live in it, not for some ostentatious whim. I bought it like you buy a strategic asset. It's a brick-and-mortar reminder that knowledge is power, and that I will never again allow anyone to underestimate my worth. Sometimes, to ensure a monster doesn't rise again, it's not enough to defeat it. You have to take control of its source of power. That house was the materialization of their greed, and now it belongs to me. It's rented out to a lovely family who, ironically, sends me a Christmas card every year thanking me for giving them such a wonderful home. The irony is not lost on me. I won't lie. The process came at a cost. I lost a marriage. I lost the illusion of a family. There were lonely nights when I wondered if I had gone too far. But then I would wake up in my house, in my reclaimed sanctuary, and feel a peace I hadn't known in years. A peace that isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of dignity. I realized I had been paying a much higher price to maintain a toxic relationship. The price of my self-esteem, my peace of mind, and my future. What I did wasn't to destroy them, it was to save myself. It was the most extreme and necessary act of boundary setting of my life. I reclaimed my name, my home, and most importantly, my power. Today, my life is quieter, but infinitely more authentic. My firm has grown. My name is respected in circles where I never even knew I wanted to be. I learned that your greatest asset isn't your house or your bank account, but the unwavering respect you have for yourself. And I learned that sometimes the only way to deal with people who refuse to respect your boundaries is to remove them from your perimeter entirely. Not out of hatred, but out of self-love. Protecting your peace of mind sometimes requires decisions that others won't understand. Decisions that might seem harsh or even cruel from the outside. It forces you to choose yourself over the expectations of others. That's why I ask you, have you ever had to build a wall, not to keep others out, but to protect the person you are becoming inside? Share your story in the comments. Let's create a community where self-worth is non-negotiable, but the foundation upon which we build everything else.